Jamma, it's your boy William Lavacum to drop the hammer. We're here with another video today called "What the Fuck Happened to Stoicism?" So first, we'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping.
Housekeeping?
Down in moments. You may start your landing.
Excellent. We'll prepare for our descent. Hey, Consuela, no cleaning. No cleaning while I'm doing the hologram. Shut that off!
Mr. Darth, you no have no more Windex on Star Destroyer.
Well, that's not my problem. Why don't you go out and buy some?
No, you buy.
What if I give you the money, then you can go out and buy it?
No.
Alright, so today's video is partly dedicated to Anna Wharton. Why Anna Wharton? Well, Anna Wharton writes for the Sunday Times, and Anna decided that she would surgically, or rather messily, sloppily, lazily inject herself into my Twitter feed and question my role as an investigative reporter. Well, guess what, Anna? You failed that investigation because you didn't ask questions. Secondly, you call yourself a reporter, but at best you're country home and living, reporting on where to put the end table. You commented on me as a keyboard warrior in a quote-unquote messy bedroom. Well, this isn't a messy bedroom. This is my game room that I built for my kids and I to play Dungeons and Dragons with all of my best friends. So I've released a short little clip for you, and you can take a look at that. And to move along here, I would like to also partly dedicate this to a... Let me just bring this in front of me here. I would also like to partly dedicate this to a special member of the community, you know who you are, with whom I had a lengthy discussion yesterday about a very exciting project that'll be coming in the future. News will follow soon on this, I'm sure. Keep checking it out. So I'd like to also provide you with an update on an analysis of my results that I've been posting as feverishly as possible, and I intend on working first on a very special project that I just mentioned that requires my immediate attention. However, you can expect updates on my results later this week, part of which I believe should include, I would like to include an updated field map for you, meaning sort of like the forensic map that I've constructed on my site that needs quite a bit of work right now, needs some updates. I also have two debates out in the ether, one to Dr. Charlotte Proudman. I eagerly anticipate your response, however, you seem to be too busy in your silo. I've also offered a debate to Kat Tenbarge, working with NBC for whatever god-awful reason. I've offered a debate as well. So, friends, I call for your help to provoke these two to action. I also need to give a huge shout out again to @Let'sHearTheTruth and @TobyCakes for their incredible research on the money behind all this, how it's flowing, where it's flowing to whom it's flowing, how much they're accumulating. It's quite remarkable. It's stunning, to be honest. Also, I kindly ask, if you follow me and you enjoy these videos, you enjoy my writing, I kindly ask that you take the time to either subscribe to my Patreon or make a donation through GoFundMe. The only two avenues I have right now to monetize my content. I'm almost at the YouTube threshold. So I also kindly ask that you subscribe to my YouTube channel and watch as many hours of my content as you possibly can. So, I'm here to ruffle some fucking feathers today, folks. Everybody ready? Alright, let's go! What are we doing today, folks? Today, I'd like to explain how the absurd is becoming sacred. Because it's not being sufficiently mocked, quite frankly. And I feel that the best avenue to take is through our friend Marcus Aurelius, a famous Stoic philosopher who drew a lot of his ideas straight from Aristotle and Plato, through the ancient Stoic philosophers like Epictetus and Seneca. However, Aurelius is one of the most famous because his works are the only real written works that are still really available to us. The ones prior to that, there are quite a few written works, but nothing comparable to Mr. Aurelius. So first, I suppose that it would be beneficial for us if I were to explain Stoicism.
What the fuck is that?
Well, the Stoic belief is that humans are by nature equal. And this was an integral part of the knowledge that certain rules of law are universally recognized, laws that all people might naturally follow. And in this way, the Romans, whose genius lay in organization and law, which you'll find as we move along, fostered the conception of natural or common law, which reason was supposed to make evident to all people.
Duh.
Correct. Our reason inherently ought to make law, natural law, or some objective list of morality evident to all people. The Stoic philosophy was rooted in Platonic and Aristotelian thought. It emerged during the Hellenistic period, 323 to 33 BC. The purported founder is still questionable or arguable. Some say it's Zeno of Cittium in Cyprus. Some say Clentius of... Oh, he's not of anything. However, I'm sure he was. They have his date of death. Some say Chrysippus. However, most of their works were incomplete, and as noted here, the only complete works were Seneca, Epictetus, and of course, our man, Marcus Aurelius.
Oh yeah!
This picture is from Royalty Now, by Becca Saladin. And why am I focusing on Marcus Aurelius? Well, Marcus Aurelius was perhaps the most famous of the Stoic philosophers, and it's important that we bring him forward for a number of reasons, because first, primarily, Aurelius has probably the most memorable quotes that you'd be able to identify with. And these have obviously, like any ancient work, been interpreted further over time. However, I think what makes Aurelius so popular is that the meaning of his words resound with everybody, regardless sort of the interpretation. They can't be reinterpreted or hijacked like a lot of discourse. And I think that's why his work lasted. So, for example, quote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." End quote. Another quote, quote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." Another, "Dwell on the beauty of life. Watch the stars and see yourself running with them. When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." And I think most importantly, this sums up the Stoic philosophy. Aurelius said, "Our life is what our thoughts make it." Although there are some complications with that notion, I think the underlying meaning is clear, and it underscores the Stoic philosophy that essentially it arose out of Epicureanism as well as other philosophies, but it arose and was very powerful for a number of reasons. First, it was powerful because of the fact that gratitude was central. It was also powerful because accountability was central. to be accountable for one's life, for one's emotions, for one's feelings, for one's actions, most importantly. And that fear or envy or all of those negative secondary emotions arise out of false judgments, and that the sage, a person who had attained moral and intellectual perfection, should not undergo these emotions or provide them with too much fuel. And from the Stoicism arose a lot of the great Roman imperial rulers, what's known as the 5 great emperors, one of whom was the infamous Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome from 161 to 180 AD, and ruled 70 to 80 million people. That's correct. That is a lot of people when you think about it. That's possibly within 2 or 3 times the population of some countries. Currently, contemporary countries. And he was the last of the 5 good emperors.
Then what?
It was during the time of the 5 good emperors that the Roman Empire expanded significantly. And they're known as such because of their military campaigns, the way they managed politics and treated the people, the kinds of... not all of them were as great as Aurelius, but the way that they treated the people, the way that they organized society, and the ideological and moral core behind their ideas and their methods of ruling. So moving on from Aurelius, we move into the around the 3rd and 4th century AD, and this was a time when Christianity took over. The writings of the various disciples, as well as the papacy, as well as other works, undermined the Stoic philosophy because of its paternalistic nature. There was no longer a belief in the importance of the self or the accountability of the self. The Christian theology was more concerned with, obviously, with doing good, like a lot of religions and ideologies. However, it was concerned more so with another greatness or another good that was transcendent of the self, or separate from the self, or abstracted from the self, and thus the accountability of the self was undermined by Christian philosophies. This was again during the 3rd or 4th century AD. Christian philosophies took over, and Roman Empire became a Christian state primarily. And as you well know, history proceeded from there in a very different direction than the Stoic philosophers might have carried it. There have been revivals of Stoicism during the Renaissance era and during our current times. And for example, modern Stoicism is a movement right now that you can find more about on the internet. Obviously, Google provides us with access to just about everything except a lot of the truth. But modern Stoicism insists that it's not things that upset us, it's our judgments about them. And this is very similar to modern CBT or DBT treatments, being able to remove oneself from the thought behavior pathway and intercept that thought in such a way that you're able to replace it or supplant it. And it's how we think about things that are key. This is something that my father taught. This is what he did for a living. And it's how you think about things that's important. It's very important. And you think about this, like Stoic philosophy is at the root of modern, of the more positive or effective modern psychological approaches to treating behavioral disorders or behavioral dysfunction. And you're only frustrated or disappointed or angry in a situation because you've judged something as terrible. And that's not necessarily wrong. However, it's how you discern what terrible means. And negative emotions should be avoided. They're based on mistaken judgments. They're unpleasant to experience, obviously. Anger is a temporary madness, as Seneca said, and should be avoided at all costs, for all too often it can escalate to violence. Now, I would argue that, as Zach De La Rocha in Rage Against the Machine put it,
Your anger is
anger is a gift, so it can be. It's how you use it. And that would be Stoicism as well. It's not the emotion that will rule me. That's my judgment of something. And I'm entitled to be angry at certain things, like I am with Christopher Bouzy, Dr. Proudman, Anna Wharton, Michele Dauber. Very angry. Amber Heard, Evan Rachel Wood. Anyhow, moving along. Stoicism was supplanted by the Christian state. The Christian state, as we know, has led to imperialism, colonialism, and essentially a global empire. And where that global empire heads, well, let's take a look, shall we, friends? That's Stoicism in a heartbeat, or in a nutshell.
My plan in a nutshell.
And from there, we'll do a quick history as we are aiming our sniper rifle at Mr. Bouzy and his attempt at using tech to undermine the narrative. But we need to sort of understand the context. That's why I'm running us through this. And so we'll look at industrialization briefly. It was a period of social change and economic change that transforms a human group from an agrarian society, which means we would collect our food and goods and resources from the land together, or not necessarily together, but that's the essence of agrarian society, and transformed it into an industrial society. This involves an extensive reorganization for the purpose of manufacturing, and manufacturing is at the heart of an industrial society. And this was the time when capital and labor were separated from one another. And this is where Marx, as a historian and philosopher, is very important, because regardless of his political views, he was a very valuable historian and philosopher, and he was the one who identified that it was around 1200 that the barons, duches, and duchesses who ruled over the land, because in feudal society, that's how we were organized, as families would organize themselves in small sort of units around this feudal center, the castle, the lord, and they would do work for them, and in return they would receive goods. However, as industrialization took hold with the trade from overseas, there was a need for a means of trade or a value of exchange, and in that time, capital, in other words, the value in an exchange, 4 bales of hay, 6 dolphins, 7 chickens, a jug of ale.
Hey, I got a beer.
That value was abstracted from the labor that was required and turned into capital or money, ducats, coins. I'll discuss the further abstraction, meaning separation from, of capital from labor as we move along. But it was during the Industrial Revolution that capital was abstracted from labor. And this is important to note because of Bouzy's strategy, because of tech, you'll see. So let's discuss a quick history here. 1765, the first Industrial Revolution saw the production of goods, saw global trade, saw the abstraction of value from labor in the further monetization of labor. The second Industrial Revolution occurred in and around 1870. That was more mass production and manufacturing had begun at that time. The printing press transformed from sort of a wooden yarn-based type thing into a mechanical mass production site. And in 1969 is the third Industrial Revolution. And during all of these times, movements like Fordism, Taylorism, and all other kinds of industrial movements pushed us from a point of mass production and manufacturing into this state of complete industrialization of just about everything, including food and including reproduction and including information and including ideologies and political views being constructed through manufacturing techniques and technologies. And that brings us to what I believe is a frightening time that we all need to really grasp, and that is what's known as Industry 4.0.
I'm not listening to you. You're crazy.
You would if you had robot ears.
I am not a robot!
Industry 4.0 has moved beyond sort of the steam-powered, mechanical power, etc. Industry 4.0 is the brink of cyberneticism, meaning the ways in which we are becoming a part of technology. For example, I'll use automobility as an example. Automobility, you think of automobiles, you think of cars, but they've become a lifestyle. They've become a way in which we are human, that without a car, life is so much more difficult. And it's not only a means of transportation, it's a means of gathering resources. It's a means of enjoying life. We become a cybernetic organism when we're behind the wheel of a car that we love. You just turn to whether it's Joe Rogan talking to Joey Diaz or whomever that's a car enthusiast, and shots of the brilliance in the innovations of the automobile industry has firmly placed us within I would call it an epic of automobility, that we are now cybernetic automobiles to a great degree. And that's an example of Industry 4.0 in the sense that Industry 4.0 identifies what's known as the Internet of Things. I don't know about you, but I sometimes have internet connection in my car, depending on whether or not I've hooked it up. Some of you may have an internet connection in your car. You may have a full visual display, heads-up display. I mean, there's an internet in your car, and the Internet of Things is an interesting concept that is at the core of Industry 4.0. So let's take a closer look. Industry 4.0. Again, cybernetic systems. And we're talking about cybernetic systems in the sense that we now have connection to our home. I don't know if you have it. I have it sometimes again. I use it sometimes again, I should say. That Google has these new home devices that are connected to your stove or connected to your security system, etc. And that, again, is also cybernetic. Thumbprints on your phone or computer. Cyberneticism is technology that requires or is operated through much more organic or human flesh type mechanisms. So the merging of our flesh, our minds with technology, whether it's Neuralink, shout out to Mr. Musk, I'm a big supporter, or his new internet, the way that he's operating.
Right, it's legal, right? So legal, right? I mean, it's legal, right?
It's totally legal.
Okay.
How does that work? Do people get upset at you if you do certain things? There's tobacco and marijuana in there. That's all it is.
That represents a cybernetic system as well. And the Internet of Things is extremely important for us to understand, because it really is an industrial revolution, and the term industrial revolution might even come to a standstill because industry doesn't even represent properly what is happening. Industry, to me at least, is more related to the gears and steam engines and hydraulics, whereas this new revolution is a cybernetic or transhuman revolution. And in the Internet of Things, we need to take a look at 9 important pillars. And this is important to my analysis here. This is important to my sniper shot at Bouzy. This is important to, it's not mine actually, I'm giving the sniper rifle to Marcus Aurelius and I'm just identifying the target. So the Internet of Things. Here are the 9 pillars. Big data and AI analysis, which is exponentially increasing, and we'll discuss big data in a moment. The horizontal and vertical integration of technologies. Now, this is another aspect of the Internet of Things that's important to grasp, because thinking of the vertical integration is one thing, but the horizontal integration, it's consuming so many aspects of our lives. Again, whether it's the stove or the microwave or your car, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't want to be a cynic, but let's all remain skeptical. We then move to cloud computing. Has very many good uses. I know that I hold things very securely on a separate server in a completely separate country run by bipartisan, completely separate entity that makes it much more secure. However, there is also a downside to cloud computing, and that includes social media platforms like Twitter and individuals like Michele Dauber, Christopher Bouzy, and Amber Heard, that they're able to use this cloud technology to assault and harass people. Augmented reality is another pillar of Internet of Things, which I think is awesome. Another one, additive manufacturing and 3D printing. Pardon my stumbling. If you know me, follow my vids, or follow my Dungeons and Dragons exploits, you know that I do a lot of my own 3D printing. Again, another aspect of the Internet of Things. How so? I get all of my files to do the 3D printing off of the internet, and we share it that way, and it improves the 3D printing process. And then again, autonomous robots is part of the Internet of Things. I'm terrified by these new autonomous robots that can perform gymnastics up to standard. It's terrifying. There's also the simulation or digital twins. In other words, you can produce another version of yourself, whether it's an AI version or whether it's just a recording. Like this recording is a simulation of myself. I now exist as a simulacrum. And the final aspect of Internet of Things, cybersecurity. And this is an important part of what we're going to discuss moving forward. So again, I've noted these, and I think it's important, as you can see here. But let's move forward, I think, to the most important aspect of this, big data. Why is that the most important aspect? Well, because it's what Christopher Bouzy thinks he's able to analyze. And quite frankly, my problem right now, in a lot of intellectual discourse, I refuse to use academic necessarily, but I will. Academic discourse as well, is that big data is a problem. And how is it a problem? It's nearly impossible to conceptualize, first of all. Second of all, there are so many epistemological issues with big data. And epistemological, for those who don't know, essentially refers to the ways in which we produce and consume and define knowledge. And big data has many epistemological issues. Big data relies a lot on algorithms. Algorithms that choose what kind of data will be made available or most readily available to you, whether it's Google's algorithm while searching for data, or whether it's your own algorithm, otherwise known as a schema in psychological discourse, as to how you decide to access information and thereby interpret it. And it relies on algorithms. And the issue with that is that data mining what you are essentially doing is mining data that's been made available to you that's already constrained by a much more powerful actor. Data that's been made available to you because of that actor's agenda. And that will become important as we move forward to pull the trigger on exposing Bouzy and BotSentinal for the complete fraud and sham that they are. And he wanted to address where fairness fails, where being fair fails, and that there are limits to what we're entitled to say, what kind of discourse we're entitled to engage in, and he believes that he is the gatekeeper for that. And the problem with that is that the fact of the matter is that being a gatekeeper for big data, any intellectual worth their weight in salt is able to tell you that it is at this point that it's called big data because it's impossible to be a gatekeeper for that. Unless you are the governmental sovereign that can crack down with the most advanced technologies, can crack down with the most advanced security cartel in the world to make sure that you can't add to that discourse or access it. However, thankfully, most of us are revolutionaries and interested in subverting this because we prefer liberty over being controlled. In sum, big data, cloud, and AI, these are all turbulent issues right now because they're still transforming. They're still coming to manifest reality. But again, big data, I have to assert, is not something that can be so easily or lazily, in the case of Bouzy, approached for analysis. So moving along from Industry 4.0, I think it's important that we discuss the ways in which we understand industry and technology now, the ways in which we interpret it, and I'll introduce another term, hermeneutics, which is a means of understanding things. Hermeneutics is sort of the term to describe how we interpret texts, was how it was originally developed with respect to the Bible, religious texts. But it overall is an overarching term that refers to the ways in which we interpret discourse, the ways in which we interpret reality, how we take that, use it, and make something from it. And there's a lot of debates about historians who use hermeneutics as opposed to attempting to trace a pattern over time by using landmarks, the way that historians may have done it in the past. That, okay, we need to track this through documents and original documents, etc. But what that kind of a historicism unfortunately overlooks is the process by which they're doing that. How am I looking for those texts? Why am I looking for particular texts? Why are those texts the ones that trace history as opposed to, say, vocal or spoken version of it? So, as you can see, the concept of hermeneutics problematizes or disrupts the way that we understand history or studying history, and also disrupts the ways in which we understand or study technology, or big data, or for that matter, Twitter hashtags. So, moving along from the advantages, I'd like to look at the sugarcoat of the advantages, and here's a cute little comic. There's the plain truth, and then there's the sugar-coated version. What version would you like? If you're following me, I'm assuming that you have inserted your coin into the machine that says, plain truth, please. And here we go. So, what is the sugarcoat? Well, let's take a look at that.
Oh, sugar. We're out of sugar, Shug.
You like sugar, huh?
Hell yeah, you my nerf herder. You my nerf herder.
So let's take a look first at the ethical implications for the overreach of big tech. And what do I mean by that? Well, data collection. We all know that Mr. Snowden had revealed that the government's been spying on us, collecting data. Joe Rogan read the terms of service for TikTok, and we've all been made aware that the Chinese Communist Party is collecting data on those who use TikTok, which is primarily youth or vulnerable individuals. And that's hugely problematic, obviously. That's a gigantic overreach. They're collecting data on us that enables them to further securitize the states, further securitize the ways in which we perform labor, and further abstract capital from our exchange value because they've learned enough about us that they can do so. What are some other ethical implications? Well, other ethical implications, that there are organizational issues. Different organizations are pressured to complete big data analytics. So the analysis that they provide, because of the capital interests and pressure behind these organizations, the data that they provide isn't necessarily accurate in an ethical sense. It may be accurate to provide to their shareholders, but it certainly isn't accurate when we turn to Mr. Aurelius's concept of accountability, or Mr. Aurelius's, let's call him Emperor Aurelius's concept of personal responsibility and gratitude. No. Organizational issues cause a problem with big data analytics because they're beholden to capital interests like Mr. Bouzy, like Twitter, like the rest of these clowns. Other issues that arise when it comes to big data, societal issues. Things arise determined by which countries are dominating the access to big data. For example, the Chinese Communist Party and TikTok. They're in control of access to that particular platform. This creates what we could call a knowledge asymmetry. What does that mean? Well, the knowledge that's being gathered by a particular population is going to be much different than the knowledge that's being gathered by another population. And my theory about TikTok is not only is it a system by which they can gather information, but it's a system by which they can dumb down the population. They've provided us these tools from TikTok to Pokemon Go. They've provided these tools that are watering down masculinity, that are watering down the profound and necessary division of the sexes, that are watering down our ethical foundation, and it's eroding enlistment in the army. It's eroding our capacity to understand information and process it effectively. It's an all-out culture war. And this is an example of a societal issue with big data. And in conclusion, there's obviously ethical implications, as you've noticed. I would like to now turn to a work by Mr. Leon Kass. Mr. Leon Kass was an advisor. He was the bioethics advisor to Bill Clinton, and he wrote a very important piece that you need to read called The Wisdom of Repugnance. And what does he mean by that? He means there is a wisdom to being disgusted by something. It's been part of our genetic makeup for time immemorial that has allowed us to transform into these incredible beings that we are. That we were disgusted with something because we held certain things sacred. And if there was something that opposed that sanctity, there was something that was unsacred, something vile, we were repulsed by it. And there was a wisdom in that because it led to not only our survival, but our flourishing. And the Wisdom of Repugnance was an essay about the morality of cloning. And Mr. Kass argued that cloning is not ethical. And I would have to agree with him because I think it relates to this transhumanism that I'm discussing. That if we were to invent cloning alongside, or if we were to, I should say, strategically refine and perfect cloning alongside AI, then what's to stop a grand technological intelligence from creating human beings to perform the labor it needs? And Elon Musk has claimed that we're merely a bootloader for the next evolutionary step. I'm not sure that I want to see that out to its fullest degree. And that was part of what Mr. Kass was arguing. And I think at the core of his argument is what I mentioned earlier, the profundity of sex. And what does he mean by this? Well, there's something very profound about the division of the sexes. There's something very profound about our need for that union. I detest the discourse that talks about that union in this discolored way. Have there been problems? Yeah, there's problems with everything. But if we trace it to its core, there's a profundity to it. The profundity of love. The profundity of sexual reproduction. The profundity of the process by which we do that. They're biological truths. They are objective truths that we currently are watching discourse tear the truth away from us. And if you're trans, if you identify as something else, that's fine. If you live your best life. Live your best life. However, there is something at the core of that. Even at the trans movement, there is a truth behind it that's being neglected. And frankly, to witness the LGBT community step forward and protest that the trans community is somewhat hijacking their what they've accomplished, what they've managed to do over time, I couldn't agree more. Because of the fact that there's these gender ideologues who are preaching this notion that gender is a performed aspect of our identity. Okay, then let's separate that from biological truth. There are still two biological sexes. There are immutable truths about reality and about astrophysics and the nature of existence. And one of those fundamental and profound truths is the division of the sexes. Whether that led to a division of labor, whether that led to abuse by all of those things are worthy of analysis, but they are certainly not worthy of completely abandoning a truth that is foundational to our existence. And he also spoke, or Cass also spoke, about the soul elevating power of sexuality that's rooted in its strange connection to mortality, which it simultaneously accepts and tries to overcome. Cass encapsulated this beautifully in that phrase, that sexuality and the biological division of sexes, there's a profound transcendence there. And we need to embrace that. And when I embrace that, there's love to it. I love trans people. I love LGBT people, queer, whomever you may be. And embracing that notion, embracing us as family. But there are biological roots. You can't tear it up by the roots just because the leaves are wilting. He argued that cloning is so perverse that it's repugnant. I'd have to agree. And I would also agree that there is a similar level of perversity with respect to the Internet of Things creeping into real life. And thus there is a wisdom in repugnance directed towards that creeping IoT as it creeps into our lives. We might think that we're the ones creating it in such a way that it's useful as a tool. But if you take a moment, a few breaths, just to recognize how technology has a life of itself and is creeping into our lives, you'll see what I mean. So we move along. That's addressing the sugarcoat of technology. We move along from the advantages of industrialization to the clear and naked disadvantages of industrialization. Well, we've experienced air, water, and soil pollution. We've experienced an exponentially increasing disparity in quality of life. We've experienced child trafficking and human trafficking which has resulted directly out of this industrialization process, because once children became workers and the definition of children changed, that's for a different video. We've also experienced increased militarization, not just of military forces, but as I've discussed in other videos, the militarization of our police force and the mercenarization, is that a word? Mercenarization, I'm sure there's a word there, I'll find it later, of our military and police force, that they've become mercenaries as a result of the abstraction of capital from exchange value and thus labor. And because of this industrialization and Tech 4.0, we've witnessed the distortion of truth and objective reality. I think that's clear. I needn't underline that by making points or giving examples other than augmented reality, for example, or other than the ways in which technology, as I've mentioned, is creeping in and interacting with our reality, and our ability to perceive and experience reality is now becoming reliant on technology, whether it's automobility, whether it's how we exist online, which brings me to another disadvantage of Tech 4.0. The exercise of biopower and politics. Biopolitics, rather. What is this? Well, I've hinted at it, that technology is creeping into our lives in such a way that it's taking over our lives to a good degree. It's also distorting our view of truth and objective reality. And biopower is a concept introduced by Michel Foucault, who you see pictured here, who's one of my favorite philosophers, historians. And again, I call him a historian, and I've had historians critique me and come at me and say he's not a historian, and then tell me why. But I simply respond with an example of hermeneutics, that Monsieur Foucault was able to observe history and the way that history was being interpreted, and then take a hermeneutic approach to say, okay, we've interpreted history in this way, and in this way, and in this, and take these different perspectives and meld them together and use them and the information that they gathered, the data that they gathered, and analyze those simultaneously. And thus I call him a hermeneutic historian, and I think there's great value to that. But more importantly, he was a great philosopher that identified a concept he called biopower. And what's biopower? Biopower describes the administration and regulation of human life at the level of the population and the individual body. It is a form of power that targets the body. And this applies in all regards, whether it's the way that military forces control where and how you can populate a certain region, right down to the ways in which we communicate with one another like I am with you now. It's a form of power that regulates the ways in which bodies can navigate their surroundings and manifest in concrete realities, the ways in which bodies can grow, the ways in which bodies are managed. And you can even look at medicine, the ways in which we manage cancer, the ways in which we treat cancer. Healthcare is a prime example of biopower. It's a means of exercising power over a population and individual bodies. I think you've grasped that. So let's take a look, though, at how biopower affects knowledge and knowledge production. And this will be important when we look at how Dauber and Bouzy are trying to hijack the narrative and thus grasp or pull the zeitgeist away from us. So, knowledge. How is it manipulated knowledge? Well, biopower determines the ways in which we can care for ourselves. How? Well, if you've seen my other videos, you know that cultural hegemony gives us cultural hegemony, the powers that be, provide the channels through which we can care for ourselves, whether that's access to food and other resources, whether that's access to philosophies by which we can live our lives, whether that's access to our relatives and friends. You can look at the pandemic as an example, a prime example of biopower, and the ways in which it mitigates and regulates how bodies are able to care for themselves. It also takes control of and power over online information sharing. It elevates and erodes expertise. And what do I mean by that? Well, academics and philosophers for time have been critical of the concept of the expert or expertise. Why? Well, who's the expert? Nietzsche captured it perfectly when he discussed the fact that knowledge is a process of production that's managed by power dynamics, that the original definitions of words, they didn't emerge out of nowhere. They were determined by the powerful and thereafter regulated by these power dynamics. And thus the expert really is determined by these power dynamics. And I think we're witnessing a change right now where the expert or the MSM journalist is now being eroded, and experts are being viewed as those people that provide truth in such a way that it's digestible, but also in such a way that it's thorough and complete. And the public is taking power back. We're taking the zeitgeist back. And what do I mean by elevate and erode and contrarianism? Well, let's take a look at Camilla and her followers. Let's take a look at Bouzy and Dauber. They're trying to erode the public's version of the expert, which is that which is consumable and will elevate you with that knowledge. And through argumentation is able to clarify a point, which is what I'm doing here. And which is what Dauber and Bouzy are trying to do with respect to online harassment and hashtags through Twitter. And they're failing miserably. Why are they failing miserably? Because it's nothing more than contrarianism at this point. They're simply standing against the flow. They're standing against us grasping, the public grasping the zeitgeist back from abusers, back from the powers that be that have used and abused us since the duchess and dukes were partitioning land for us in exchange for a coin. And biopower also refers to the emergence of new biological knowledges. Whether it's epigenetics, the ways in which we're understanding how at the very tip of our genome is a little bulb that changes and shifts and jumps to another genome and changes the very nature of the way in which our DNA interacts with our physical body based on our surroundings and the ways in which we think. This is a new knowledge that's coming forward that I think is worthy of more than our attention. It's worthy of a lot more than we're giving it. But it's hindered by, obviously, capital interests and also by the discursive channels that are either limited or the levees broken open, like I hope we're doing now with Dauber and Bouzy. Another new biological knowledge that's come forward, for example, in a negative light, was the recent pandemic. The knowledge came forward. It was a form of biological knowledge about bodies and the ways that bodies need to be regulated. And that I think is a very clear example of what Michel Foucault means by biopower. Most, I think, importantly, especially related to Bouzy and Dauber, is that Monsieur Foucault identified how biopower is able to interpolate. Again, this brings us back to Louis Althusser's concept of interpolation, which is the process by which a subjectivity is brought into being. An identity and subjecthood that is in service to capital. In other words, your very essence of being is your subjecthood, your subjectivity is brought into existence in service to capital. And what does he mean by that? I mean, who doesn't get up in the morning and think about the work they need to get done? You got to fight for what you got. I love my home. I love living here. My boys love it. There's no way I'm going anywhere. And in order to keep it, I need to fight for that money. I need to get that cake, man. And thus, my body is in service to capital almost from the moment I wake up. Sure, I have a coffee, a smoke, maybe a piece of toast, and then I get going. But it is in service to capital, and that's a result of biopower being exercised. Monsieur Foucault entitled that Homo economicus, which I think is a very profound verbiage to use. Moving forward from biopower, he spoke of biopolitics. And what is biopolitics? Well, biopolitics, let's take a look here. Sorry, I have to get... Biopolitics refers to the political relations between the administration or regulation of life, which we discussed as biopower, and a locality's population, where politics and law evaluate life based on perceived constants and traits. Foucault wrote about it, he gave a lot of lectures about it, but he summed it up that biopolitics is the way in which powers that be ensure, sustain, and multiply life, to put life in order. So biopolitics is the process of putting life in order. And how exactly do they perform that task? Well, let's look at security. Processes of security is a great example of biopolitics. And I say insecurity because security really is a coin with two sides. And let's take a look at what I mean by that. Well, there were a lot of recent sort of neo-Foucauldians or followers of Foucault who wrote a lot of material about the state and security based on Foucault's ideas. And David Garland is one. Mark Neocleus is another. There's a lot of great work that has emerged out of Foucault's foundation, and it discussed the fetishization of security. And what do I mean by that? Well, even if we were to look at Bouzy and Dauber, for example, the fetishization of security, they claim that Johnny Depp supporters are harassing Amber Heard and her people. And that depends on your version of harassment. But they've fetishized the concept of security, meaning that it has become perverted in such a way that it no longer really has a meaning. They're trying to secure Amber and her followers from harassment. And Amber and her followers feel insecure because of the way that Twitter handles their particular policies and the way that YouTube handles their algorithms. So the algorithms that are designed to make you feel secure actually apparently aren't working and are elevating a level of insecurity. And that's sort of the process of fetishization, that we're so obsessed with a perverted version of security that it's become our main obsession, and through that obsession and fetishization, it becomes perverse. It becomes a distorted and uglier version of itself that's worthy of repugnance. And I think we're witnessing that on Twitter as people are getting banned, whether it's Megan Murphy, a Canadian scholar who got banned for saying a man is not a woman. Again, I'll announce, I'll proclaim from my full chest, live your best life. I don't give a shit if you identify as a woman. That's not my life to live. What I give a shit about is discourse. What I give a shit about is biological and essential and immutable truths. And through the fetishization and perversion of these forms of security, by way of biopolitics, control of life over bodies, we're mangling children to make them feel less insecure about life. Well, guess what? Life is very hard. We're thrown into this turbulent existence. And it's our job as parents to guide individuals based on immutable and foundational truths. And it's also the commodification of security that's problematic. That could be the commodification of these particular kinds of surgeries, that they're a form of capital accumulation. And I think that's problematic in so many ways, because that would mean that knowledge production, or the essays and statements that support these monsters that are mutilating children because they want their top done or their bottom done at whatever age. I think it's because of the capital interests and commodification of both security and insecurity that have led to this. Another great example of the commodification of security and insecurity would be the ways in which abortion rights are handled in the States. The Supreme Court ruling, I can't disagree with, because the Supreme Court is not there to rule over this particular issue. I might lose some fans here, but what do I mean by that? This is meant to be governed by the state. That's the way that the United States is organized. It's a decentralized political system. The state is meant to deal with it. But how do they deal with it? Commodification of the practice. So instead of the individual states making it available because they were all in agreement that it is a necessary procedure if it's safe, etc., etc., you know the quote, regardless, it was commodified, and certain individuals had to cross state lines, etc. So, as you can see through the fetishization and commodification of security, the exercise of biopolitics over our bodies, things become perverse. The results are the erosion of the profound division between sexes, the erosion of family, of the concept of family, of fatherhood, of womanhood, of motherhood. And Elon Musk quoted recently or tweeted recently, motherhood is the greatest job ever. And so is fatherhood. I'm a single father. And I have both my boys living with me. And there is not a better job in the world. And sure, now I need to figure out a way I need to grind and find that capital. I need to fetishize something and make sure I got enough money coming in to put food in their bellies. But fatherhood is definitely the best job. But the powers that be have eroded. Discourse has eroded. Academics, some intellectuals, the ones that are on the other side of the roaring rapids, they've tried to erode the family. And they've also, through these discourses and various practices, eliminated the concept of expert. The concept of expert has been so diluted. Instead of being the individual that the public tends to gravitate towards, instead of being the individual that people, communities, lean on for support, lean on for information, for definitions, for outlines, for guidance. Instead, the expert has been diluted by all of this ideological academic rhetoric, where a top sociology professor can't define the word woman. I'll do it for you. An adult human female. This process has also been alongside or contributing to a consolidation of power. A consolidation of power in the hands of those that are more than happy to split and divide the family, to abstract expert from the crowd or the public, to abstract capital from exchange value, so on and so forth. And Christopher Bouzy and Michele Dauber are part of this insecurity process. So, seeing as I've discussed the powers that be and the hegemon in great detail, it's probably important that we take a look at that. Why? Well, I fear that we haven't yet quite escaped a feudal means of social organization, meaning that we still have dukes and duchesses and barons and baronesses that basically partition land and demand that we exchange our labor for capital value that they exploit. So we haven't really moved past that. And as much as people argue over the type of social organization that exists today. Most arguments are political, talking about communism or capitalism, and those are all important arguments. But I think most importantly, we need to look at the ways in which power has determined how we are organized. And that's why I turned to biopower and biopolitics, because really, at the end of the day, what we're looking at is the exercise of power over human bodies, the ways in which they are organized, where we live, how we eat, etc. And the power behind that are oligarchs. And an oligarchy we will take a look at. So an oligarchy is a small group of people having control of a country, organization, or institution. And there will be, I'm sure, arguments that my viewers and many of you will have against this notion, but I can't stress this enough, especially considering the the incredible concentration of wealth within the hands of a few. And frankly, that's what, and the abstraction of exchange value, wherein all of that value is transferred over to these oligarchs. So let's take a look here at the economic effects or economic organization. So what's happened because of this increased concentration of wealth in the hands of a few? Well, it's resulted in the dematerialization of value. And what do we mean by that? Well, I think I talked to you about the abstraction of exchange value from labor in the form of capital. So value no longer has a material existence. In other words, you look at something and you say it's worth however much, right? You can say it's worth whatever it is to you. That's different. But it's become dematerialized in the sense that the value of something, a box of wine per se, I guess that gives a little bit away about me, a computer, a car, all of these things have your own personal value, but the exchange value of it has been dematerialized. In other words, nothing gets exchanged. If you buy a car, you sign a form. Unless you buy it in cash, but I mean, that happens so rarely these days. And it's increasing at an exponential rate. And what does this mean? Well, it means that there's a new age. We're transferring into an age where capital, the abstraction of value from the actual labor itself, has now become data. Information and data are the new capital. And what we've witnessed because of this, whether it's cryptocurrency, whether it's offshore banking, whether it's globalized trading, we've noticed an exponential increase in the accumulation of capital, the concentration of it. The difference being that accumulated information capital isn't the same as, say, printing money or the gold standard, where there's a material component, or you can control it by how much you print or create or don't, or mine or don't. In this case, information and data mining has become nearly endless. And this is problematic for the power dynamics of knowledge production. Insofar as we create knowledge, as I discussed earlier, the definition of things doesn't emerge from nowhere. It comes through negotiative processes that are firmly situated within a power dynamic, and that power dynamic, in a lot of ways, in most ways, and most likely in the very first instance, is determined by wealth and who has the most capital. That's problematic for the production of knowledge. It's corrupted academic studies endlessly. It has given us the problem of Chris Bouzy and Michele Dauber determining what's harassment, and that's just one example. And I think I've been clear about how knowledge production is problematized because of capital accumulation and power dynamics. So, moving out of the economic construct or economic effects and fallout of oligarchical rule, let's look at the socio-political, meaning the ways in which biopolitics operate in a social setting or upon our processes of socialization. They're able to incite a moral panic, and we're witnessing this. If you watch a video that I created about policing the false allegation crisis, I've outlined how over the course of 30 or 40 years, through increasingly polarized discourse about womanhood and femininity and etc., and the demasculinization of men, they've been able to incite a moral panic. What's that moral panic? Rape culture on college campuses, whereby young men like Owen Labrie they're able to make them into targets and make them into perpetrators, and thus cause fear and incite political movements and incite campuses to vote for Hillary. What else are they able to do? This is another example of destabilizing communities. So the process of fear-mongering on college campuses about how every woman on that campus is possibly the next victim of a rape, they're able to destabilize that community. That community can't organize appropriately except in such a way that benefits the hegemon or oligarchs. They're able to organize it in such a way that there are various pockets that are low-income housing versus high-income housing. I don't think I need to go any further with that. What else are they able to do? They're able to redefine the self. What do I mean by this? Well, what do you define as self? I have my own versions. I named one of my dogs George after George Herbert Mead because Mead's version of the self is my preferred version. You need to read more Mead. And what do I mean by redefine the self? Well, through these information technologies and through control over these cultural channels and through control over the socio-political framework that they're viewed in and consumed in and expressed in, they're able to define for you what versions are available to be a self. And I think this is most noticeably witnessed in the gender ideologue movement, whereby gender ideologues are promoting the notion that the self is amorphous, which it isn't. There are biological roots to the self. And it's gender ideology that's tearing the plant out by the root and redefining the self. And there are vicious capital interests, captains of industry with voracious appetites for capital accumulation behind this. The division of the family is a way by which they're able to destabilize resistance. If you haven't got a family that each individual can identify as rooted in an objective truth, then what kind of cohesion is there? And what else are they able to define? They're able to define your proximity to the norm. What's the new norm? And frankly, we are social creatures. Our desire in the socio-political framework is to be close to the norm, or at least have a norm, or at least follow something that we can judge as a guidepost for our daily existence. And through socio-political engineering, they're able to define your proximity to the norm. Whether you want to be an outsider or not, they're still deciding upon what you're an outsider from, whether you like it or not. We'll rebel and resist. Moving forward from the socio-political influence, I think I've spoken a lot about ideology, and I think we need to address that. Ideology, I overwrote. Ideology, I prefer Monsieur Foucault's version of what this is. Why? Because ideology it's a useful term. Ideological, all of those terms are useful to describe something in your vocabulary. Hold on to it. However, I strongly suggest you look at Foucault's work because he describes it as an episteme. And the difference is an episteme is ideology, but situated within sites of power dynamics. So ideology is more like the broad abstract term to describe it, but episteme is the situated term historically speaking, meaning that an ideology is always within the confines or constraints of manifest reality as well as power dynamics, defining what particular kinds of knowledges are acceptable. So, for example, people getting banned on Twitter because of their, because like Babylon Bee got banned on Twitter because they disagreed with a particular gender ideology. That's an example of episteme. It refers to a principal system of understanding such as scientific knowledge or practical knowledge. However, it's situated within a site of power dynamics. For example, scientism, the fact that we believe so strongly in science as an ideology as opposed to a process. It's a process. It's not an ideology. That's problematic. And gender ideologues. Both of these processes are eroding our concept of family and what Cass called the profundity of sex. I hope my Stoicism is showing. So, that's oligarchy. Now let's move on to the problem at hand. Christopher Bouzy. You can see here Christopher Bouzy alongside Gary Coleman, who will be playing him in the Johnny Depp movie on Netflix. No, just kidding. Shout out to my good boy Tommy. He's my spirit animal. You need to follow Tommy. Pains of a King, I think, is his current tag. He had to switch it around because he was being harassed. But he chose Owen Wilson to play Eve Barlow, and he chose Gary Coleman to play Christopher Bouzy. Oh man, what was the other one? Oh, I forget off the top of my head. But moving along, let's take a closer look at Bouzy. So Bouzy, I would like to define as a cuck. And what is a cuck? A cuck is a weak or servile man, often used as a contemptuous term for a man with moderate or progressive political views. He's basically some dude who lets his girlfriend sleep around because he doesn't have the balls to do anything about it. I also like to define it as a man who runs to hide from criticism under his mommy's apron. In other words, all of those tweeters who have turned their replies off, and they turn and talk to their mommy in their silo, that's my version of a cuck, and Christopher Bouzy, you're a cuck, bro. So, moving along here, I plan to completely dismember you and BotSentinal, discursively speaking, of course. That's not a real threat. That is an ideological threat. But actually, instead of doing it myself, I think I'll let Marcus Aurelius do it. Moving forward, I would like to examine Mr. Bouzy, let's say on his face. What does his social media look like? Well, Mr. Bouzy suggests on Twitter that he analyzed 5,139 tweets.
You sure of that? I'm sure of that.
Sure. Containing the hashtag. Oh, he. By the way, he was also involved in trying to dismantle or diffuse the hate campaign that was against Meghan Markle. I don't agree with hate in any form, but I think, like I mentioned earlier, the sacred is becoming the absurd, or the absurd is becoming the sacred, because it isn't being mocked sufficiently, and thus, I mock thee, Meghan Markle, because I think you're actually working for different corporate interests. And I mock thee, Christopher Bouzy, for even trying to defend Meghan Markle from the public who wanted to call her out.
Protesting it. I swear to you, I'm going to protest it.
And all I can hear is criticize, criticize, criticize.
So here's Bouzy spreading his bullshit on Twitter. Here he is again talking about one of the reasons why he decided to do this was because cyber bullies are going to turn to Evan Rachel Wood next. Well, that's because Evan Rachel Wood is a fucking liar. And who is Bouzy retweeting here? Who cares? So, referring to Evan Rachel Wood, And then we have Bouzy here saying, I urge everyone to watch this entire video before rushing to say that it was a justified shooting. This will be controversial with you folks. This is with respect to the Michele Bryant incident where Michele was brandishing a knife in public and she was shot, I believe, in the back a few times by an officer. I think it was questionable whether the officer should have used his weapon. However, as far as eyewitness reports go, Michele was brandishing a knife that was later identified, I believe, as a plastic knife, but she was brandishing a knife in public, and the officer shot her. I won't justify either actions, but I will say this was definitely during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been exposed as being another corporate marketing enterprise. Do I believe Black Lives Matter? Fucking of course I do. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the millions of dollars being funneled into charities and up the chain to the oligarchs, and the ways in which they transfer money to one another. And this was during that time, and Christopher Bouzy, being the cuck that he is, buys into the Black Lives Matter movement, and he feels that it's his opportunity to chime in on Michele. And frankly, it was a weak analysis at best, but here are the tweets that he put down. So there's number one. Number two is he talks about he harassed the officers, by the way. He talks about how Nicholas Reardon had his friend or had his hand on his firearm the entire time before he shot. That's police protocol when somebody's brandishing a weapon. Michele Bryant, he had several opportunities to de-escalate the situation. Okay. Christopher, I'd like to see you play police officer in the streets and then talk about de-escalation. Before taking the fatal shot, he exited his cruiser with the intention of pulling his firearm. So Chris just pulled discursive acrobatics on y'all. He exited his cruiser with the intention of pulling his firearm. So apparently, Chris Bouzy not only has his hand on technology, but he's a fucking gypsy telepath. All right, so we'll move on to 3. Michele Bryant wasn't shot in the chest. Are you a coroner too? And you will see that if you watch the entire video. She was shot in the back and side. The officer had enough time to tackle her from behind, but he was too busy aiming his firearm to shoot as if he was playing a video game. Wow, Chris, you brought video games in too. I've done a lot of research on video games, and that the jury's out on that, whether video games increase violent behavior. They do increase anxiety. The jury's out, but for you to make this statement just makes you look like more of a fucking idiot. So let's take a look at that one. All right, moving along. His next tweet. Number 4, while you are watching the video, remember you are watching children. Black children are not adults, nor are they more mature than their white counterparts. So he already played the race card, black and white, capitalized them too. You are watching children fighting, and a child brandishing a flimsy table knife. She is not some deranged killer. Nobody said she was. You're terrible at this. You really are. You're fucking terrible at this. Just stop. Let's look at another tweet. Oh, let's take a closer look. I told you guys about inauthentic accounts that were amplifying the Michele Bryant narrative. Today, a piece by blah 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 was published outlining what happened. So he's harassing journalists as well as the officers that were involved. It's none of his fucking business. Unless he has the evidence in front of him, which he clearly doesn't. And then he goes on about Meghan Markle. He's defending Meghan Markle. Again, I'm more than certain that the corporate interests behind all of this, the oligarchs and their foot soldiers, have funded Mr. Bouzy and Michele Dauber to collaborate with Proudman and Taylor and all those fucks to bring this message to you. A message from Bouzy. You can read the tweet here. This anti-Meghan Markle account, at Bouzy Don't Care, used to go by the handles 27 March 27 and Freedom Speech 27. Now she spams people who reply to me with absurd nonsense. Please take a moment and report at Bouzy Don't Care for targeted harassment or spam. Thank you. And here are the receipts. Man, you fucking baby. You're being harassed? Give me a break. You're being criticized. Stop running under mommy's apron, you little cuck. Exclusive. We analyzed 5,000... Oh, we saw this one already. Exclusive. Our latest report illustrates how Amber Heard and her supporters were subjected to rampant abuse and targeted harassment. Twitter essentially left the women to fend for themselves with little to no support from the platform. Download it here. Amber Heard and women who tweeted in support of Amber Heard were attacked relentlessly. Twitter trolls would swarm the tweets of women who tweeted positively about Amber Heard and often used vulgar and threatening language. You literally sound like that little kid who's telling his mommy on his friends because someone said fuck in the house. Trolls that participated in spamming anti-Amber Heard hashtags bragged about their ability to get hashtags to trend. They also encourage others to spam anti-Amber Heard hashtags. Oh, so you mean collective social action was taken by the likes of prominent Johnny Depp supporters to trend particular tags so that liars like you and Michele Dauber couldn't control the narrative. Oh, you mean we did our job better than BotSentinal did? Oh, you mean that we're better at managing the tech algorithms than you are? Ha! Fuck you, Chris. Moving along. So that's Chris on social media and my quick summary. I hope you enjoyed it. Now I would like to dismember his methodology. My methodological critiques, they'll be fairly intensive. I won't go too in-depth to lose those viewers who aren't necessarily well-read or bibliophiles like myself, but I will first take a look at Mr. Bouzy's report. So here's his report that he published. It's available online. And frankly, let me begin by saying I took a look at this as open-mindedly as I could. I did feel some compassion here and there for Mr. Bouzy, that he's just a man trying to make his way in the world. And I quickly flipped that switch and said, fuck that. This is the most ridiculous excuse for a report that I could possibly ever imagine. This is the best that he could muster up. So we'll look, there's the table of contents and his key findings. We identified 627 Twitter accounts used primarily for tweeting negatively about Amber Heard and her female supporters. 3,288 accounts were tweeting Amber Heard is an abuser. Amber Heard is an abuser. Amber Heard is a liar. And Amber Heard is a liar. And 19% of those accounts were dedicated to spamming the hashtags. Women who tweeted in support of Amber Heard were subjected to rampant abuse and targeted harassment on Twitter. I won't read through all of these. You can read it yourself. It's available online. But as you can see, these are his key findings. If I submitted this at all to my followers, to my readers, to a professor, to anybody of any worth, this is a joke. He provides a disclaimer. Here's his overview that you can read on your own time, but let's take a quick look. During the Depp versus Heard trial, we observed Amber Heard hashtags regularly trending on Twitter. After the trial ended, the anti-Amber Heard hashtags continued trending. We researched the activity. You have no right to use that word. We researched the activity to determine whether the trending hashtags resulted from organic activity or platform manipulation. Oh, Chris, let's move on so I can tear apart this complete bullshit. There's the overview. He wrote a good long introduction. And then here's his data. Hashtag spamming. Copy pasta. What are you, fucking 12? Bragging and encouraging. How do you define that, Chris? Oh my God. Abuse and harassment. I'll skip through this. I don't want to read it. Trolling prominent academic. I wonder who you're referring to, Chris. Could your connection to Michele Dauber be any more prominent? Is she footing the bill, or are the people paying her footing the bill? Oh my God, you're so fucking transparent. And here's his tweet data. This is his data. Good job, bud. Usually my data sheets are about 36 pages, but I mean, maybe I'm doing something wrong. And the top 20 spam accounts. Well, if you see this and you're on this list, consider yourself my hero. You made it on Chris Bouzy's top 20 spam accounts, which means that you're fantastic. So if you're there, I owe you a beer, or we'll smoke a joint together one day. So moving from top 20 spam accounts, he's got the Twitter rules. He writes his shitty conclusion. It's our opinion Twitter didn't do enough to mitigate the platform manipulation. Shut the fuck up. You can all read this on your own time. I'm not even going to bother. And then his suggestions for improvement. Oh my God. And then, of course, about BotSentinal. And moving out of that. So that's his report. I'm shattered. I'm shattered by your report, Chris. I feel I've done wrong in my life, and I need to reevaluate how I use Twitter. Thank you. So let's take it to ripping him to shreds here, shall we? An individual level of analysis. You'll love my picture in the corner there. That's Amber Heard representing the Chinese Communist Party on behalf of creative arts agencies who practically own the Democratic Party. So what's the individual level of analysis, Chris? Well, I'm doing this for you, bud. Just hoping that maybe the next time you perform any research or provide a report, there are some kind of underpinning principles behind it. So the individual level of analysis explains group and organizational events in terms of a single person's traits or behaviors. Words such as style or personality or nature are used to describe this level of analysis. There's where I retrieved it from. And let's take a look at the individual level of analysis that you didn't take a close enough look at. And what kind of measures did you use, Bouzy? How the fuck are you measuring this shit? How are you measuring it? How are you measuring hedonism? What do I mean by that? Some people engage in activities simply because it's pleasurable. I don't mean hedonism as a lifestyle necessarily. We're all hedonistic. We all give up on the stoic principles that keep us whole or keep our families together from time to time. We all get down. And sometimes we get hedonistic on Twitter. How did you measure that, Chris? Whether or not someone was being hedonistic, did you measure their tweets about it against their other tweets? Fucking idiot. How about emotional contagion? How did you measure that? How did you measure how the emotions that somebody has and expresses on Twitter, how did you measure that and how it affects my emotions? How did you measure that? You didn't. Oh, you didn't? How did you measure the effects of stakeholder interests? In other words, how did you measure the ways in which the Twitter rules and policies affect people's opinions and perspectives? Does that promote them being more aggressive? You don't know. Why don't you know? Because you didn't fucking look at it. So there's the problem with your measures. And that's just a start. Tip of the iceberg. Just the tip, pal.
Perhaps play a little game called Just the Tip. For a second, just to see how it feels.
Ooh, it's in. So let's take a look at another problem on the individual level of analysis, shall we? Sampling. What's sampling, Chris? You don't know what it is. So it's a trick question. I'm going to humor you and answer it. All right? So sampling. You need to consider the population size. What's the overall population of Twitter, Chris? Do you know that number? Because if you do, that means you actually know Jack and the other assholes on the board that are making decisions, which means you are working... Oh, you are working for the technocratic oligarchs behind all of this. Or you don't know the population size, and thus your sampling is fucked. So let's move to the next issue that we have. Saturation. When did you reach a level of saturation? Saturation is the point at which you have collected enough data, where there is no more new data that you could possibly collect. How did you determine the point of saturation, Chris? Because Michele Dauber sent you a fucking email and said we need this report out?
Why am I doing this? Because I'm a villain. It's pure and simple.
We don't want the bad guys to win?
Now, how did you measure temporal differences? Do you know what that means? You have to gauge over time how differences vary. You didn't do that at all. In any way. You didn't measure time. There was no longitudinal element to your study, Chris. It was a cross-sectional study at best, but it wasn't even that, because the data you collected was over time. How did you account for that? Oh, you didn't. That's just the individual level of analysis, Christopher Bouzy. Let's take a look at another methodological critique I have of BotSentinal and your recent report. A structural level of analysis. Let's educate you, Christopher. What do we even mean by structural level? Are we talking about intra-individual? Inter-individual? Let me explain the difference. Intra-individual and inter-individual means between two individuals or within the constraints of two individuals. Just so you know, Chris. Are we talking about positional differences? Meaning like your social position, your social standing, your ability to access different resources. What structural level of analysis are you addressing here when it comes to Twitter, when it comes to Tech 4.0, when it comes to the massive amount of big data and the overreach of these corporations and their social position? What about the social position of the administrators and moderators of Twitter? Did you discuss that at all? A little bit. You talked about their rules, but you didn't talk about how they developed those rules or the ways in which their social position affects the rules that they've made. Or are we talking about the ideological level? Or are we talking about the varying levels of interplay between networks in computational organization and processing? Chris, you claim to have started your work coding on an Atari or whatever the fuck you say in your bio, but are you talking about the different interplay between computational organizational networks? In other words, how Twitter has changed, or how Twitter depends on a different source of computational processing than it did 5 years ago, or that different levels of computational processing and access to the great internet, the divide, how does that affect the ways in which Twitter is accessed or Twitter itself is produced? Did you analyze that at all? No, you didn't. Let me answer that for you. No! Or are we talking about traditionally understood socio-political layers? Are these enough questions, Christopher? I invite you to answer them, because if you can answer them, I might read another report. But let's eviscerate you further. Your measures. How the fuck are you measuring this shit, Bouzy? How are you measuring hierarchies of influence? In other words, the differences in, say, or the asymmetries in family structure and how that affects the ways in which people interact with the internet. Are family structures in particular regions different? Of course they fucking are, and it affects the way in which we can access information. Is that in any way involved in your analysis, Chris? How about organizational integrity? So let's take a look at Twitter and the way in which they are more than happy and willing to restrict discourse on a very totalitarian or authoritarian level. Did you look at the integrity of Twitter? Or did you just assume that they operated the way that they, quote unquote, ought to? You ran with a lot of assumptions that may not be true, Christopher, and you're wrong. What about reference group membership? Did you analyze the ways in which Twitter users, Twitter admins and moderators, how and which way they consider themselves a member of a group? What group are they a member of? Did you analyze the Amber Heard stands? What group they believe they belong to? Do they believe that they belong to the Amber Heard group? Did you analyze the Johnny Depp stands and what group they belong to? Because I know at least half of the people that I've met in this wonderful community weren't necessarily Johnny Depp fans. They were fans of justice, you dumb fuck. So, there's an evisceration of your structural level of analysis. But more importantly, we have more sampling issues, Christopher. What are those sampling issues? Well, again, a trick question because you can't answer it. Let's humor you, though. What, again, was the population size? What, again, was your point of data saturation? And again, how did you manage to track, record, analyze, and interpret temporal differences? What theoretical framework did you use? You dumb fuck. There. My methodological critique, as you can see, is short and sweet, but it does the trick. Now that my methodological critique is finished, I think it was short but sweet and got the job done. Thanks to Marcus Aurelius, who I will turn to in a moment. But first, I would like to talk about the cuck that we know as Christopher Bouzy. Why? Well, Christopher Bouzy has a bit of a history. Bouzy was involved in numerous defamation cases, him and BotSentinal. If you look it up, you can find more about it. This is Mr. Bouzy and George Webb against Jason Goodman. That's one case that he was involved in, and you can find more. He threw his lawyers at it to get the whole case to go away. I wonder where he got the money for that. Well, let's take a look at this. Christopher Bouzy started a dating site in 2011 known as If Solo. He was the CEO of Agiska Corporation, the parent company of If Solo, that he advertised as a, what does he say here? We have a few, I can't read it, but popular dating site offers premium features plus highly eligible singles, but charges no membership fees. Wow. How did you pull that off, Chris? Impressive. That didn't seem to last long because I've never fucking heard of it. Here's another interesting fact about Mr. Bouzy. This is Mr. Bouzy. I think he's suing a woman named Jennifer Harrison. Or no, yeah, she's the debtor and he's her roommate. In April 15th, 2019. You can find this online. Jennifer Harrison and Christopher Bouzy being sued for rent monies. What else do we have here? We've got the bot scam. Guy who published the anti-Meghan hate accounts denounced as fraud. I'd like for you, friends, to do a little bit more research on this. He was called out for the ways in which he was identifying the Meghan Markle hate tweets, if you will. And he was exposed as a fraud for the ways in which he was exposing those. And again, obviously, I guess he decided he'd move on to a new enterprise of protecting Amber Heard. Here he is being quoted, retweeted by Michele Dauber, who is proclaiming, "Thank you for taking action." This is to Susan Wojcicki. There is more to do. At YouTube's monetization of open misogyny and rape culture is a big problem because YouTube is perhaps inadvertently incentivizing the production of misogynist content. Don't be evil. Best, Michelle. As you can see, Michele Dauber and Christopher Bouzy have been colluding for some time now, which would mean that Bouzy's ideological goals align with Michele Dauber's ideological goals. which are to identify women on campus as a victim and thereby give them the power to identify any man as a perpetrator. This is the process by which discourse is collapsed and allegations and accusations are immediately identified as guilt, and Bouzy is a part of this process. As you can see, Michele Dauber is in support of Bouzy's attempts. I think it's also very important that we identify that Christopher Bouzy he's since scrubbed, I don't know if it was him or Ken Dauber or Google themselves, but scrubbed the internet of content that identified him as a child abuser. He abused his daughter Natalia. He wasn't able to get the certain content removed from YouTube, where there was actual video evidence of it. How it's been removed since, as far as I know. I can't find it any longer. But police have confirmed that after tracing the email, it came from an IP address in North Bergen, New Jersey, where Bouzy lives. Bouzy has never been able to admit that he doxed the wrong person after I showed that I had contacted him directly 2 weeks before he attacked the wrong Alex. I suggest you look this story up online for further information. Christopher Bouzy is just as bad as Dauber or Camilla, trying to dox people who are stoic in telling the truth, in bringing accountability forward, personal responsibility to the forefront, and these people do not want to be a part of that because their goal is to ruin people's lives, those people whose discourse, whose opinions, and whose research do not align with their political agenda. So that's Christopher Bouzy's wonderful personal life in a nutshell.
My plan in a nutshell.
Let's take a look now at our inspiration for all of this. See, I believe that Bouzy and Michele Dauber have given in to hedonistic impulses to achieve their own personal and political agendas. The taste of victory, without any real concern for the ramifications and consequences that their actions have for others, how it hurts others. They're not accountable or responsible for that. Michele Dauber was involved in framing Brock Turner as well as Owen Labrie. Christopher Bouzy is now involved in the hate campaign against Johnny Depp and trying to protect Amber Heard. And Michele Dauber and the corporate interests behind them are indeed trying to force this narrative. Why? Arabella and George Soros owning the Women's March, for example, and tweeting about how women are victims. They want this narrative to continue because there's millions of dollars behind it. And so personal accountability isn't anything interesting to them at this point. Personal responsibility isn't something that they're willing to accept. And it's time to call them out. It's time to call these villains and liars out. And Marcus Aurelius is the perfect man to do it. Why? Let's talk about him. Let's look into some of the things that he had to say that relate to this. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. I know these seem like simple things, and they are. But sometimes the elegant complexity of things that are simple breeze past us. Clearly that statement's breezed past Michele Dauber and Christopher Bouzy. Let's look at this one. When another blames you or hates you, or people voice similar criticisms, go to their souls, penetrate inside, and see what sort of people they are. You will realize that there is no need to be racked with anxiety, and they should hold... You will realize that there is no need to be racked with anxiety, that they should hold any particular opinion about you. Good advice for Amber Heard. Good advice for Chris Bouzy. Why don't you go back and look at yourselves? How more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? Indeed. Here is a rule to remember in future. When anything tempts you to feel bitter, not this is misfortune. But to bear with this worthily is good fortune. In other words, carry your cross, bitch. And finally, I'd like to end on this, my friends. Marcus Aurelius said, how much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only at what he does himself to make it just and holy. And as what is absurd creeps verily into the realm of the sacred, my friends, I've brought this critique forward. I'm doing something about it. I'm not simply tweeting. I'm not simply hashtagging. I'm bringing this forward. Because what I do myself, what I do that is just and sacred, I can combat these absurdities encroaching on what we hold sacred. We have the zeitgeist in our hands. I'm sick of this shit.